Death Before Cockcrow. Written by Petr Macek, music by Daniel Barták, read by Jamie Marshall. Morgan Davis hanged herself on the night of February the 2nd in the lavatories of the St. Ignatius Catholic School. The incident could have posed grave problems for the Institute, which aimed to educate young ladies from the upper classes and prepare them for wedlock, as the poor girl had left a farewell letter in which she cited torment and persecution by her fellow schoolmates and dormitory lodgers as the reason for her voluntary departure from this world. The school had a reputation of being one of the most rigorous yet prestigious facilities of its kind in England, and its headmaster was among the many acquaintances of Mycroft Holmes, brother of my dear friend Sherlock Holmes, whose cases I regularly put on record. By way of Mycroft's influence, therefore, the detective and I found ourselves on the scene shortly after the body was discovered. Yet I have hesitated for quite some time in putting this adventure to paper, for the mere recollection of this deplorable crime, which ended in the death of a 13-year-old girl, makes my soul uneasy. Nevertheless, as the topic is of grave social significance, I feel it is right for my readers to finally learn the truth. For what ran in the press at the time was but a mild derivative of the facts. The headmaster of the school, the much-respected Mr. Oliver Schaffer, was awaiting us impatiently. His appearance was so distressed that had his tousled hair not already been streaked with silver, doubtless it would have gone quite white after the events of that morning. He led us through the icy halls of the boarding school, his scarlet gown fluttering a few steps ahead of us, and before every turn he pecked cautiously round the corner to ascertain that the way was clear. At present, only my deputy, the maid who found her, and of course the doctor who was called in, know anything of the tragedy. I didn't want to raise a fuss before the matter was duly investigated. Miss Davis hails from a very high-ranking family, and her older brother is soon to take over her father's peerage in the House of Lords, he whispered. Lessons had already begun, and the long corridors of the school were, fortunately for the headmaster, entirely devoid of people. Only our own hurried steps resounded on the polished stone floor, which reflected the first cool rays of the morning sun falling through the tall windows. Children can be very cruel, I sighed. Often unconsciously and without malintent. In their immature minds, they are unable to estimate the boundaries of what is fun and humorous to them, yet degrading to the point of self-destructive psychic problems for others. Indeed, nonetheless, they often show an inclination towards deliberate sadism and the desire to injure even at a very young age, countered the detective. As always, my dear Watson, you strive to see the world through the prism of your natural kindness. I, however, am a realist. I know that evil is present in creatures of every age. Schaffer listened to our dialogue with growing dismay. I've never encountered such a thing in all my career, he retorted. Our pupils are raised to lead respectable lives and to love their kin. Why, their very pedigree guarantees high moral standards. What you speak of has no place at our school. Holmes did not raise his voice in respect of the headmaster's wish to deal with the affair without needless fuss. But still, his words stung like whip. Blood does not run blue in some and red in others, he said searingly. Nor does pedigree guarantee kindness. I could name more than a few well-situated noblemen whom I've convicted of heinous crimes. If there was one thing that Holmes despised, it was bigotry, signs of which he had noticed in the headmaster's speech. If indeed someone had driven Miss Davis to her final act, I intend to investigate the matter, identify the culprit, and hold them accountable. And I should point out beforehand that their age or social status are of no significance whatsoever to me, he added curtly. By then, we had reached the scene of the incident. The door to the lavatory was locked, with a sign affixed at an eye level that read, "Out of order." To make sure, Schaffer's deputy, a rather younger professor with a keen eye, kept watch. Quite unlike the dishevelled and flustered headmaster, we were met by a man with a ramrod spine, carefully coiffed and attired in a well-fitted suit of clothing and polished shoes. John Riesling, he introduced himself, shaking our hands in turn. He had a firm, dry grasp, unlike his superior, whose handshake had been nervous, with rather clammy palms. Nobody has entered except for the doctor. The detective absorbed this information. His eyebrows drew together over his aquiline nose like two oncoming trains, and with a deep intake of breath, preparing his mind for what he was about to see, he had the door unlocked and grasped the handle. I entered immediately behind him, followed by the two schoolteachers. I will refrain from depicting the sombre scene that opened before us. Excessive descriptiveness has no part in this case. I myself am not of an overly sensitive disposition, but I must consider the possibility that Morgan's relations might read this text, and they would doubtless be aggrieved, even after so many years. The lavatories on this floor consisted of 10 stalls fitted with locks in 2 rows of 5 facing each other. The stall doors did not reach from floor to ceiling, as is usually the case, but instead ended some 8 inches above the threshold. A space of at least a yard separated the upper doorframe from the ceiling, which was crisscrossed by the gas pipelines that snaked through the entire building. At the end of the elongated room, a skylight looked out onto the courtyard. The tiled wall nearer the entrance was festooned with porcelain wash basins and towel racks. Above them hung dull mirrors, and the cheerless scene was underscored by the flickering glow of an electric light. A tall, bony man, wearing a pince-nez, stood near the skylight, staring blankly into space with reddish eyes. He had loosened his stiff shirt collar, and his bowler hat was pushed so far back on his head that I wasn't surprised it hadn't fallen off. He kneaded a cigarette butt between his thumb and index finger, pulling on it absent-mindedly, without realizing it had gone out. "Professor Haggins, the school physician," piped up Schaffer behind us. The doctor blinked and fixed us with a pitying gaze. "There was nothing I could do. She was dead long before I arrived," he said flatly, in lieu of a greeting. He had already freed Morgan's body from the noose and had laid it on the floor. Her eyes were closed, and in her pure white nightgown she looked quite like a sleeping angel, except for the hideous red line from the rope that had snaked around her neck and cut into a soft child's skin. The door of the penultimate stall stood wide open, and a pair of discarded slippers lay nearby. The other end of the cut rope was still hanging from one of the gas pipes beneath the ceiling. It was all I could do to control my senses as a chill passed down my spine. "Have you moved anything?" Holmes asked Haggins. "I had to take her down. I couldn't—" The physician's voice stuttered, but he regained himself and continued. "I couldn't just leave her hanging like that." "Quite so," the detective reassured him. "She was discovered here at 5 o'clock in the morning. Before dawn, during cleaning," Riesling chimed in. "The other girls were still asleep in the dormitory, so nobody had noticed she was missing. She must have crept in during the night. Judging by the stiffness of the body, I would guess that she died between 1 and 2 o'clock after midnight." Haggins added. Mind, I am not a medical examiner like you. His estimate precisely matched mine, at least based on my general examination of the corpse. Nor was there any doubt as to the cause of death. So I merely confirmed what had been said. Neither of us intended to question the school physician's expertise, but my friend did prefer to rely on my expert opinion, albeit he often managed on his own. Were there any signs on the body of grievances she claimed to have suffered? Torn hair, bumps, bruises, scratches, or scrapes? Inquired Holmes. I noticed nothing of the kind, either today or ever, the doctor confided. We had no reason to doubt his words, as he appeared to be a thorough and caring individual. Where is the suicide note? May I see it? Holmes turned to the headmaster. In my office. Any tampering with evidence makes my job very difficult, the detective frowned once again. My mistake, admitted the deputy headmaster. I acted on impulse, and when the doctor and I found the letter, I took it to Mr. Schaffer. I do apologize. Holmes sighed. Very well, I shall examine it later, he said, heading towards the stall where Morgan had chosen to kill herself. Was Miss Davies talented in sports? Like any other normal 13-year-old girl, Riesling shrugged. I shouldn't think she was in any way exceptional, although she did enjoy ball games. Why do you ask? She performed quite the athletic feat before her death, the detective mused, gazing up at the ceiling. By all accounts, she must have climbed onto the doorframe, pulled the rope up, and attached it to the pipe. I can see, even from here, that she opted for a nautical knot. Are the girls at your school commonly taught those, perhaps during embroidery lessons? I don't know what you're implying. Schaefer frowned, displeased with the tone in which Holmes had started speaking to him. Likely, he had imagined the investigation would take a rather different turn when he asked Mycroft for help. Oh, I'm merely thinking out loud, Holmes reassured him. His undisguised scepticism seemed to have affected me too. Nor do I see any chair or stool that she may have jumped from, I remarked. Most likely she stood on the toilet bowl, slipped the noose around her neck and threw herself off, suggested Haggins, closing his medical bag. A chair could make noise while falling over and wake everybody up. Certainly quite possible, my friend conceded. Miss Davis was remarkably considerate towards her alleged tormentors, despite having decided to end her life, he said, unable to resist yet another snide comment. It was obvious to me that something was amiss. But Holmes appeared to have finished here. Gentlemen, I do believe it's high time we allowed Miss Davis to rest in peace, he commanded. Dr. Haggins, would you ensure that her body is taken to the morgue quietly and out of sight of inquisitive eyes? The child deserves some respect. Of course. Excellent. I would have one more favor to ask. I will need the rope she used for further analysis. Both ends. Holmes pointed to the noose and to the other segments below the ceiling. Could you arrange this, please? Certainly, the doctor nodded again. Thank you, the doctor said, departing. The rest of us shall carry on. Schaffer and Riesling returned down the corridor with us, waiting to see what Holmes would produce next. Naturally, the chief item on his mind was the farewell letter. We proceeded to the headmaster's office, which in no way reflected the austerity of the furnishings in the girls' school and boarding house. Upon seating ourselves on a comfortable leather divan and receiving a cup of coffee, which I greatly appreciated given the busy morning, Schaffer removed the incriminating epistle from his desk drawer. Holmes perused it impatiently, running his fingertips over its surface, and then turned it over several times, examining it minutely. I see you have some doubts. The writing is unquestionably Morgan's, I know it well. She is in my natural sciences class, and I correct her work every day. Riesling confirmed the authenticity of the letter. It would seem I've met my match in terms of reading body language, the detective replied. But I suspect you haven't a clue as to what I'm thinking. By now, even I was taken aback by the antagonism with which Holmes treated the school's representatives. Has the young lady made any similar attempts in the past? I inquired. No, not in the 2 years she spent at our establishment, Schaffer replied, choosing to ignore Holmes. But one incident did occur just before she joined us. It was shortly after her mother's death. Unfortunately, I'm unfamiliar with the details. My friend tusked in annoyance and handed me the letter, which seemed to have entirely lost his interest. It was covered in small, neat handwriting pressed to the upper edge of the page. The words, phrasing, and articulation indicated a writer of profound sensibility and rich imagination. She complained that nobody understood or comprehended her, and that she was being mistreated by an unnamed person. Indeed, she found life pointless as a whole. I would like to see the bedroom where the young lady slept, preferably before some diligent busybody decides to clean it. Holmes asked the two teachers while I devoured the letter. Then I would like to meet her classmates and all your students who might have any knowledge of harassment on the school premises. I must question all of them thoroughly, ideally before noon. The headmaster's face flushed with suppressed indignation. I am not certain their parents would consent to such actions, he sputtered, the steam building up in him. After all, they are but children. Holmes gazed down at him in a condescending manner. My esteemed headmaster, he said, it grieves me that in your arrogance you fail to see that I am acting in your own best interest, first and foremost. Is that not why I was summoned? Believe me, it is essential. The strength and authority of Sherlock Holmes's personality impressed the fuming head of the institution, as it had so many others before and afterwards. Very well, he muttered resignedly, dropping his head into his hands. I shall not hinder you in anything. Have you already informed Miss Davis's family of her passing? Not yet. I intended to wait after your visit. Then do hold it off for another few hours. They deserve to receive complete information, not mere speculations. I shall inform you of the results of my investigation as soon as I can. We left the exasperated headmaster to his woes and had his deputy guide us to the school's boarding house, where the students were lodged. Here, Riesling introduced us to the housemistress, Mrs. MacDonald. The austere, elderly lady had learned of Morgan Davis's fate only a few moments ago and had not yet managed to overcome the shock. She was wringing a lace handkerchief in her hands. Yes, indeed, relationships in girls' groups can sometimes be strained, but I didn't notice anything that could have induced Morgan to take her own life, she sobbed. Just childish pranks, minor squabbles, and petty banter. She led us through a large, well-lit room that served as a bedroom for 8 girls. None of the young ladies lodging at the boarding house had private quarters. All the rooms were shared by 6 to 10 girls. The bedrooms were sparsely furnished to the point of being almost Spartan. Each girl had nothing but a bed, a nightstand, a small cabinet for personal items, and a wardrobe. Given the exorbitant tuition fees and the fact that the institution was intended for girls from affluent families, I found their stark living conditions rather striking. It is precisely for this reason that our school is so highly regarded by their families, Mrs. MacDonald explained somewhat testily, dabbing at her puffy eyes. We guide the girls towards the utmost modesty, strive to detach them from material extravagance, and encourage their lasting spiritual blossoming. What can you tell us about Morgan's character? The detective inquired. She joined us a year after her father, Lord Davis, was widowed. He himself is gravely ill, and Morgan's mother, the young Master Stuart Davis, is not among the most responsible guardians. The young lady lacked proper upbringing and education. She was 10 when she arrived at our school. For the first few months, she was rather rebellious and stubborn. But this changed, and our relationship improved. She was a gentle, sensitive girl with superb academic results. Did she fit into the collective? I can't say that she had a bosom friend among the other girls, but I'm not aware of an explicit rival either. In her farewell letter, Morgan wrote of mistreatment, I recalled. I strongly deny any suggestion that it came from me or any other of the teaching staff, Mrs. MacDonald declared adamantly. Nor is corporal punishment used here. The detective browsed the bedroom, minutely examining every detail. Are the girls under constant supervision, or might something have happened between them at some unguarded moment when they were alone? I find it hard to believe she made it up. This is not Newgate, Mr. Holmes, the housemistress retorted, with a reference to the infamous London jail. The girls have precisely as much privacy as they require. During lessons, they are with their teachers, and then the governesses take over. We are responsible for them, so they are naturally under standard supervision. I repeat, I have no knowledge of any mistreatment. Holmes paused near the only unmade bed in the room. We left everything just as Morgan had left it, like you requested, said Mrs. MacDonald. Holmes nodded in satisfaction and looked through all the compartments and drawers in the cabinet, as well as the closet. He found nothing to puzzle or disquiet him. On the nightstand was a stoneware jug and an empty glass. The detective peered into the jug and inhaled the sweetish odour of the dark liquid at the bottom. Grape juice, he remarked. Our wards only drink clean water, said the housemistress in surprise. We do not serve them sweet beverages or wine. How odd, pondered Holmes, but not criminal. She may have procured it in the kitchen. Perhaps Morgan was feeling peckish before bedtime. I wouldn't be surprised. Morgan had rather a sweet tooth, she agreed. When my friend had finished examining the bedroom, he asked Riesling and MacDonald to arrange a meeting with the other wards. They were questioned in the faculty room in the presence of the teachers, but without any duress put on the children by the adults. Holmes was gentle and considerate, but spared them not at all. His questions were probing, straightforward, and he made it clear to the girls that it was a very grave matter indeed. Yet, try as he might, he discovered nothing more about any harassment in the group. I'm sorry you've travelled so far for nothing, sighed Riesling, after all the girls had left. I can think of nothing that could shed more light on the circumstances of Morgan's death. I don't find my work to have been futile. Do you? Exclaimed Holmes in surprise. I do not wish to offend you, the deputy headmaster replied, alarmed. I am not offended. I've long since become used to seeing what others are blind to, do not wish to see, or are incapable of connecting. The last stop on our tour of the school was the kitchen, situated in the nether regions of the building. The place was a hive of activity, a dozen assistants performing all manner of work, from slicing vegetables to washing dishes, took care of meals for the army of young wards and teaching staff under the watchful eye of the cook. I smelled the characteristic aroma of curry, an exotic spice that formed the basis of the lunch being prepared, and which I'd become fond of during my time in India, where I'd served in the military for some years. Where were you stationed? Asked Riesling when I articulated my thoughts aloud. I was posted as an army doctor to the 5th Northumberland Regiment in India, but when the Second Afghan War began, I was reassigned to the Berkshire Regiment. After suffering an injury in the Battle of Maiwand, I was moved to the Peshawar Hospital, where I succumbed to a severe intestinal disease, ending my military career, I confided. I see. He nodded politely and lost interest. We paused only briefly in the kitchen. Holmes inquired whether Morgan had appeared the evening before and whether anybody had given her grape juice, but was unable to obtain any information other than that dinner had consisted of boiled beef. Nor were we able to determine Miss Davis's afternoon and evening whereabouts, and thereby her state of mind at the day's end. I was curious to see what direction Holmes would take from this dead end. "And now let us have luncheon," the detective announced to my complete surprise, arranging with Riesling to meet again in the early afternoon with the headmaster Schaffer in attendance. "In the meantime, I shall set things straight in my mind and hopefully have all the answers by then." I was anything but hungry under the weight of the circumstances, but was prepared to accompany Holmes, whose appetite never seemed dulled by any agitation or repression. Yet he declined my company. "I shall stop by the Diogenes Club to see my brother, as we have some matters to resolve," he apologized. "Besides, I perceive you have little appetite, Watson. Instead, I shall ask a favor of you. Go and see Haggins, who has surely examined Miss Morgan's corpse quite thoroughly by now, and ask him whether he noticed anything suspicious around the nose, and indeed ascertain it for yourself. The rope the young lady hanged herself on should also be ready, so do bring it back." He gave no further explanation, whistled for a cab, and was gone. I dutifully did all he asked of me, without knowing what purpose Haggins' findings would serve and how they might fit into the great detective's reasoning. We met again some 2.5 hours later, and were led directly to the headmaster's office. Holmes had not returned in a good mood, so I supposed he had made no progress. Schaffer and Riesling, both rather aloof, settled into their armchairs as we did, and waited for the detective to start speaking. Evidently, neither of them expected Holmes to identify the perpetrator of the torment which caused Lord Davis's daughter to take her life, and thought that the whole affair would end up being swept under the rug without greater harm to the school's reputation. But as always, my friend surprised them with his definitive and uncompromising judgment. "Regardless of what I've been told here today, it turns out that ordinary bullying among children is the least of the problems you may have to face." He opened his statement, firing off the rest like a gunshot. "For I have reason to suspect that nothing of the kind was at play in this case. Miss Davis was obscenely murdered." Schaffer grasped for breath, and Riesling spat out the tea which he was sipping. "Might I ask what makes you think so?" the headmaster inquired incredulously. "Not only do I think so, but I am ready to reveal how the murder was committed, the motive, and the murderer," Holmes replied coolly. At that moment, one could have heard a pin drop in the room. Usually, Holmes savoured his monologues once he'd solved a case, but this time he was brusque. I attributed this to the age and innocence of the victim. He had no intention of exploiting this dramatic moment to exhibit his detective acumen. "As soon as I saw the scene of the crime, it was obvious to me that the truth would differ greatly from what the murderer, should we accept my hypothesis, had attempted to make us believe. First and foremost, I do not believe that a slip of a girl, barefoot and nightgowned, would have been capable of climbing up to the lavatory ceiling, expertly tying the rope and then hanging herself on it without any assistance." Schaffer found nothing odd about it at all. "Small children are as agile as monkeys. They can climb anywhere," he said with a wave of his hand. "Then there is the length of rope and the absence of a stool or a chair to jump from. Holmes continued. I don't understand. Holmes asked for my bag, from which he removed the rope I'd retrieved from Haggins. We shall, of course, have the height of the lavatories measured again, but it is obvious at first glance that the rope is too short for Morgan to have hanged herself from the toilet seat. She would have had to have stood on something much higher, a chair or a stepladder, yet nothing of the sort was found in the lavatories. But surely there's an explanation. Perhaps the maid or the doctor removed it. It cannot be explained, Holmes insisted. Morgan simply could not have hanged herself on this length of rope and without some support under her feet, which nobody could have removed because it was never there. It is easily proven. I had to admit that his logic was persuasive. But what about the farewell letter? The headmaster exclaimed, starting from his armchair to remove the epistle from his drawer. It is her writing, is it not? He cried, waving the letter about. Holmes nodded, but did not consider it irrefutable evidence. The letter is indeed authentic, but it has been manipulated, he announced. Somebody forced her to write it, the deputy asked, raising his eyebrows. You must be fantasizing. I suggest we call for a graphologist who will surely give us the truth. As far as I know, it will be easy to determine whether Morgan wrote the letter of her own will or under duress. An analysis shall be most welcome, smiled the detective. But it was the sly smile of a cobra inconspicuously approaching its chosen prey. Do you know what such an analysis would determine above all? That the ink is 3 years old. I understood. Is it the letter she wrote during her first attempt at suicide? Not first, but only attempt, Holmes corrected me. The murderer merely used the letter to help conceal his heinous crime and disguise it as another unfortunately successful attempt. Notice how close to the upper edge of the paper the writing begins. There is almost no natural margin. The paper was trimmed to remove the upper section, which doubtless contained the date. The two pedagogues were sorting his words in their heads. In the context of the school, her mention of mistreatment might, when cleverly interpreted, suggest bullying from the other girls. But in my opinion, she meant nothing of the kind. You may consider this part of my investigative conclusions to be good news. Neither Schaffer nor Riesling looked especially delighted. Now wait, how do you explain that a letter dating back 3 years and of such a sensitive nature would find its way into the hands of your imaginary murderer? Asked the headmaster, hesitant to believe. I shall get to that promptly, along with the motive, the detective assured him. I simply don't believe it, fidgeted Riesling. Just the question of how to plan the murder of this sort. Are you suggesting somebody abducted the little girl from her bedroom in the night and dragged her into the lavatory? Why, she was sleeping there with the other girls. She would surely have made a fuss and woken the others. My friend's mind was firm, even in this regard. The murderer was quite familiar with how the school is run. He knew that the wards of the St. Ignatius Catholic School are almost always under supervision, either of the teachers, the housemistresses, or the children themselves. He had practically no opportunity to attack, so he had to wait for Morgan to come to him, or rather, to go to the lavatory alone in the night. Riesling threw up his hands gleefully. Why, surely, Mr. Holmes, you must see what nonsense you are trying to persuade us of. So the murderer hid in the lavatories for heaven knows how long, waiting for Morgan to come in there alone at night. It's absurd. What if a different girl had appeared? Or did he not care who it was? One cannot plan something of the sort, I beg you. Mr. Riesling, you teach biology, if I'm not mistaken, the detective continued, undeterred. So, You must be surely familiar with the effects of sweetened beverages. They are diuretic. And why? Because they contain excess sugar, which the body instantly eliminates through urine. If you wish to force somebody to go to the toilet in the night, give them a sweet juice drink before bed. As a physician, I had to admit that Holmes was right, and somebody had given Morgan a jug of grape juice just before bed, I recalled. He could have estimated at what time the urge would coax the girl to get up. But who? And why? Schaffer slumped miserably in his armchair, no longer looking quite so stubborn. Why indeed? Why would anybody do something of the sort? This is the crucial question which we have finally circled back to. The fundamental essence of every crime. The motive, exclaimed Holmes, raising his forefinger and piercing the air before him with it. Even I could no longer breathe for excitement. I have spent the last 2 hours with my brother Mycroft, who holds a very high position in our esteemed government, as you all know, he confided. As such, he has access to any variety of information, or is at least able to procure it. While speaking, he pulled a watch from his waistcoat pocket and checked the time. When he asked me to look into poor Morgan's case this morning, he did so knowing that she was the daughter of Thomas Davis, a respected member of the House of Lords. However, Lord Davis has been gravely ill for some time, and his son Stuart is expected to inherit both his title and his fortune within the next few months. And because my brother is rather insightful, he had young Master Stuart investigated this very morning. By lunchtime, he had received the report. It would seem that the fortune he is to share with his sister Morgan upon their father's death would scarcely cover his gambling debts. He needed her portion as well. Are you suggesting that he had his sister killed so as to become the sole heir? I asked, horrified. Everything suggests it, and it was he who gave the murderer her old farewell letter and plotted and staged it all. Evidently, he was never particularly fond of his sister, for he is the person she writes of in the letter, the one who mistreated and abused her. Morgan was tormented by her own adult brother. Stuart never showed any interest in her, and it was he who persuaded their father to send her back to boarding school. Holmes glanced at his watch again. Excellent, he murmured contentedly. Our friends from Scotland Yard will have arrived at the Davis estate by now, and Master Stuart will surely be answering their questions shortly. He may even confide who the hired killer is, I said hopefully. But, my dear Watson, I already know, the detective said, depositing the watch in his pocket and looking intently at Schaffer's deputy Riesling. Let's call a spade, shall we? The deputy paled, and his perfect facade seemed to lose some of its sleekness. What are you saying? He said, clearing his throat. I am merely saying that you are the wolf in sheep's clothing, and one of the most hideous murderers I have ever met, Holmes retorted to his face. What evidence do you have for such accusations? No, it was quite elementary, remarked the detective, crossing his legs in the armchair. From the moment I first saw you, I knew you must be a former soldier. Your bearing, your attention to dress and your manner, the drill of the military oozes from every pore of your body. Yet later in the kitchen, after you reacted so coolly to learning that my friend Watson is also a former soldier, I corrected my opinion. The rivalry between the infantry and the Royal Navy is common knowledge, so I judged that you had trained and served in the latter. And you yourself told me that it was you who had given Headmaster Schaffer the, as you called it, discovered farewell letter. It was you who instilled the idea that the writer was speaking of torment, and in his shock, the headmaster accepted your claim without hesitation. Riesling rose slowly, but Holmes remained calmly seated. I regretted not having brought my trusty old revolver, but never would I have thought it would have been needed on school grounds. Yet the detective utterly ignored the deputy, who was exuding a silent menace. As I hinted earlier, it was you who gave Morgan the sweet juice before bed, and then you waited for her in the lavatory. Had anybody else come in before her, you would simply have remained hidden in one of the stalls. Apropos Watson, he turned to me, did Haggins obtain the information I inquired about? Yes, Morgan had light burn injuries in her nose, I admitted in a daze. Aha! I was not mistaken about that either. Holmes thanked me for the news. So, Mr. Riesling, you ambushed her and subdued her with chloroform. Then it took little effort to slip her body into the noose and unscrupulously hang the poor girl. As he spoke, Schaffer stepped as far away from his deputy as possible, blinking his eyes fearfully. Riesling looked ready to pounce on the detective. At first, I was unable to explain to myself why you would do such a thing. But Mycroft proved helpful in this regard as well. He is far more clever than I. He discovered that you had served in the Royal Navy with Stuart Davis. So you knew each other well, but you also shared the vice of gambling. With your meagre teacher's wage, you were even worse off than your noble friend. So his plan suited you remarkably well, concluded Holmes. The recess bell rang, and girlish giggles echoed from the door separating the headmaster's office from the school corridor. We were three of us facing Riesling, but Schaffer and I were no match for his physical prowess, and I'm afraid the former soldier would have overcome even the strong and agile detective. A police whistle sounded below the windows opening onto the street. It was coming closer. 2 squads had departed from the yard, that is obvious. Holmes met the deputy's gaze. Riesling glared back into his steel-grey eyes, countless options likely filling his head. Then his gaze flitted to the fireplace, adorned with a cavalry sabre on the mantel. As a soldier, you have only one recourse, Mr. Riesling. I shall not stop you, Holmes said curtly. The deputy headmaster took several deep breaths as he fought with himself, then gave us a salute. His death was mentioned only briefly in the newspapers, overshadowed by the much greater tragedy.